Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. My name's Mark, 57 years old, and as of 3 months ago, I'm no longer married. For 33 years, I thought I had a good thing going. My wife, Denise, and I had our ups and downs like anyone else, but we always seemed to come through stronger. At least, that's what I believed. Turns out, I've been living a lie. Let me backtrack. Denise and I got married young, me at 24, her at 22. We built a life together, raised 2 amazing kids, and shared a lot of good memories. Over the years, we faced our fair share of challenges. There were times when our intimacy faded. She struggled with body image after having the kids, and I had my own issues with stress from work. But we got through it, or so I thought. We talked it out, went to counseling a few times, and always managed to find our way back to each other. Or again, so I thought. A few months ago, Denise went on a trip with a few friends. A girls' retreat, she called it. I didn't think much of it. She needed a break, and I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? After 33 years, you don't expect your spouse to betray you. But something about her behavior when she got back didn't sit right with me. She seemed distant. Like she was there, but not really there. When I asked her how the trip was, she kept it vague, just said it was fun and quickly changed the subject. Over the weeks that followed, I started noticing more signs. She was glued to her phone, and when I'd walk into the room, she'd quickly put it down. She started going out more, claiming she needed alone time or was catching up with friends. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia. I told myself, Mark, you're overthinking this. She's just enjoying herself. Let her be. But it was hard to ignore the gut feeling that something was off. Then one night, everything came to a head. Denise left her phone on the counter while she was in the shower, and a message popped up. I wasn't proud of it, but I looked. And there it was, the proof I didn't want to find. It wasn't just one person she was involved with, it was 2. A married couple. The messages were explicit, things I'll never be able to erase from my mind. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely put the phone down. When she came out of the bathroom, I confronted her. At first, she denied it. Mark, you're imagining things, she said, acting as if I was the crazy one. But I wasn't backing down. I told her I'd seen the messages. That's when she broke. She admitted it. She said it happened during the trip, that it just got out of hand and didn't mean anything. She begged me not to make any rash decisions, swore it was a mistake, and said it would never happen again. But the damage was done. After Denise's confession, I felt like I was drowning. 33 years of marriage, and this is where we end up? I told her I needed space and left the house that night. I drove around aimlessly for hours, replaying everything she said. But the more I thought about it, the more her story didn't add up. The next morning, I sat her down. I told her, if there's more, you better tell me now. I can't go through this piece by piece. She swore she'd told me everything, that the affair was a one-time thing during the trip and that it was out of character. She kept repeating that phrase, like it was her way of excusing what she did. I don't know what came over me, Mark. I was just lost in the moment. I asked her why she'd do this after everything we'd been through. She looked at me with this pathetic, teary face and said, I felt neglected. You've been so focused on work and the kids that I felt invisible. Invisible. That word hit me like a truck. I wasn't perfect, I'll admit that, but I'd spent decades trying to make her happy. I worked hard to give us a good life, stood by her through health scares and her own moments of doubt. I thought I was doing everything a husband was supposed to do. And now she's telling me she felt invisible? Still, I wanted to know more. My gut told me she was holding back. So I pressed her. You're telling me this happened with 2 people, and it was just, what? A fling? A one-time thing? She hesitated, and that hesitation was all the answer I needed. Finally, she admitted it had been going on for months before the trip. She met the couple at a mutual friends gathering. We just clicked, she said, like that made it okay. Apparently, they'd been texting and meeting up in secret for weeks leading up to that trip. And the trip? That wasn't just a girls' retreat. They'd planned to meet up there, and she went along with it. I was stunned. The sheer amount of lying, every detail of her story just unraveled the more I pushed. She lied about the trip, about who she was seeing, about how long it had been going on. And the worst part? She tried to make me feel like it was somehow my fault. I told her I was done. There's no coming back from this, Denise. You've lied to my face over and over. I don't even know who you are anymore. She started bawling, falling to her knees, grabbing my hands. Please, Mark. We can fix this. I'll do therapy, whatever you want. But I couldn't even look at her. I packed a bag, told her I'd be staying at a hotel, and left. As I walked out the door, she was still crying, screaming for me to come back. I didn't. That was the moment I knew, this wasn't just a bump in the road. This was the end of our marriage. After I left, I stayed at a small motel just outside town. It wasn't much, but it was quiet, and I needed time to think. Denise kept calling and texting non-stop. At first, I ignored her, but eventually, curiosity got the better of me. Her messages were a mix of apologies, promises to fix things, and of course, more excuses. One text stood out. She said, I made a mistake, but after everything we've been through, don't throw this away over one bad decision. One bad decision? This wasn't a one-time slip-up. It was months of betrayal. Every lie she told me, every text she sent to that couple, every time she left the house pretending to be somewhere else, that wasn't one decision. It was 1,000 little ones, and every single one of them cut me a little deeper. The next day, I met with my kids, Rachel, 29, and Matt, 27. Telling them was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. They're both grown and have their own lives, but I knew this would shake them. I didn't want them hearing a sugar-coated version of the story from their mom. When I told them, Rachel started crying immediately. She's always been closer to Denise, and I could tell this shattered her view of her mom. Matt, on the other hand, just sat there silently, fists clenched. After a moment he said, How could she do this to you? I didn't have an answer. Both of them assured me they'd support whatever decision I made, but I could see the hurt in their eyes. This wasn't just my world falling apart, it was theirs too. For now, I told them, I'm filing for divorce. I don't see any way around it. Neither of them tried to change my mind. In fact, Matt said, Good. You deserve better. Hearing that from my son? It meant everything. I left that meeting feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. I had their support, but it was another reminder of just how much Denise had broken. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about the entire family. 2 days after telling the kids, I contacted a lawyer. That alone felt surreal. 33 years of building a life with someone, and now I was sitting in an office discussing how to end it. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Claire, didn't sugarcoat anything. This is going to be messy, she said. But the sooner you take control, the better. I told her everything, about Denise, the lies, the affair with the couple. Claire didn't flinch, just nodded and started outlining the process. You'll need to divide assets, of course. Do you have a preference for the house? Honestly, I didn't care about the house. Every corner of it felt tainted now. I told her I wanted to sell it and split the proceeds. That night, I went back home to gather more of my things. Denise was there, waiting for me in the kitchen. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she was still wearing the sweater I'd last seen her in. Mark, she started, please can we just talk? You don't have to do this. I didn't even let her finish. It's done, Denise. I've already hired a lawyer. Her face crumpled, and she broke down crying again. She begged me to reconsider, saying she'd go to therapy, that she'd spend the rest of her life making it up to me. But I'd heard it all before. I told her, you had months to think about the consequences of your actions, and you chose to keep lying. There's nothing left to talk about. I walked upstairs, packed another bag, and ignored her as she followed me around, pleading. Before I left, I said, the next time you hear from me, it'll be through my lawyer. That was the last time I spoke to Denise directly. From then on, everything went through Claire. Seeing Denise's name pop up in emails about the divorce made my stomach turn, but I reminded myself, this was the only way forward. Once the divorce process officially started, the first major step was selling the house. It wasn't an easy decision. I'd lived there for almost half my life, raised my kids there, celebrated milestones, but now it just felt like a monument to everything I'd lost. Denise fought me on it at first. This is our home, Mark. Can't we just wait? Give it more time, she asked during a meeting with our lawyers. I could hear the desperation in her voice, but I wasn't budging. This house doesn't feel like home anymore, I told her. You can buy me out if you want, but I'm not staying here. In the end, she couldn't afford to keep it on her own, so we agreed to sell it and split the money. Putting it on the market was harder than I expected. Walking through the rooms with the real estate agent, I felt this wave of nostalgia hit me. I could almost hear Rachel and Matt laughing upstairs as kids, see Denise and me decorating the Christmas tree, all those happy moments that now felt like a cruel joke. The first open house was awkward. Denise insisted on being there, and every time I saw her talking to potential buyers, I felt this weird mix of anger and sadness. At one point, she pulled me aside and said, "Doesn't this feel wrong to you? Like we're just throwing everything away?" I looked at her and said, "You made that choice for both of us the day you betrayed me." She didn't say another word after that. It took a couple of months, but we eventually found a buyer. When the sale closed, I felt an odd sense of relief. I wasn't tied to that place, or her, anymore. I used my share to rent a small apartment downtown. It's not much, but it's mine. For the first time in decades, I felt like I could start over. Selling the house felt like closing one chapter, but the emotional fallout was far from over. Rachel and Matt had been supportive, but the strain was clear. Family dinners, which used to be filled with laughter, now felt heavy. We'd meet at Rachel's house or a restaurant, and though we tried to keep things light, Denise's absence hung in the air like a storm cloud. Rachel was the first to bring it up. "Have you talked to Mom?" she asked one evening as we sat in her living room. I could tell she didn't want to upset me, but the question had clearly been eating at her. "No," I said. "I don't have anything left to say to her." Rachel nodded, looking down at her hands. "She's been texting me a lot. She wants to explain, but I don't even know what to say to her." "Say whatever feels right," I told her. "I'm not going to tell you how to handle your relationship with your mom. Just don't let her guilt you into anything." Matt, who had been quiet up until that point, chimed in. "She's trying to guilt all of us, Dad. She texted me last week, saying you're rushing into the divorce and that she wants to fix things for the family's sake. I told her she should have thought about the family when she was sneaking around with strangers." Hearing that hit me hard. I didn't want my kids to carry the weight of Denise's mistakes, but at the same time, I couldn't blame them for feeling the way they did. "What did she say to that?" I asked. Matt shrugged. "She started crying. Said she made a mistake and didn't want to lose us. I just told her I needed space and ended the call." Rachel looked at him, then back at me. "Do you think she really regrets it?" I paused before answering. "I'm sure she does, in her own way. But regret doesn't undo what she did. It doesn't fix the lies or the damage she caused." Rachel wiped a tear from her cheek. "I just don't understand why she would risk everything. We were all happy." Hearing her say that broke me. It wasn't just my marriage Denise had shattered, it was the life we'd built as a family. After that night, I decided to write Denise a letter, not to reconcile, but to make it clear that I wouldn't tolerate her dragging our kids into this mess. I told her she could explain herself to them if they wanted to hear it, but she needed to stop using them to try to get to me. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't going to work. She didn't reply to the letter directly, but Rachel told me later that Denise had started seeing a therapist. Apparently, she was falling apart, couldn't sleep, had lost weight, and spent most of her days crying. Part of me felt sorry for her, but a bigger part of me felt like this was just the natural consequence of her choices. Meanwhile, I focused on reconnecting with Rachel and Matt. We started having regular dinners again, just the three of us. Slowly, the heaviness started to lift, replaced by a cautious sense of normalcy. For the first time in months, I felt like we were finding our footing as a family, even if it was a new version of what family looked like. About a month after the house sold, I thought things were settling down. I had moved into my apartment, started working out to keep my mind occupied, and even reconnected with a few old friends. For the first time in months, I felt like I had some control over my life again. Then Denise called. I hadn't heard her voice since the day I walked out of the house. I stared at my phone for what felt like forever before answering. "Mark," she said, her voice shaky. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but please, I just need a few minutes." Part of me wanted to hang up right then and there, but curiosity, or maybe a sense of closure, kept me on the line. "What do you want, Denise?" She let out a deep breath. I wanted to apologize again. "I know words can't fix this, but I need you to know how sorry I am. Losing you, losing everything, it's the worst thing I've ever done to myself." I stayed silent, unsure what to say. After a moment, she continued. I'm in therapy now, she said. It's been eye-opening. I realize how much I hurt you, the kids, myself. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say this. I can't live with myself if I don't at least try to own what I did. There was a long pause. I could hear her trying to hold back tears. Finally, I said, I'm glad you're getting help, Denise. But that doesn't change anything between us. I know, she whispered. I know I destroyed us. But, Mark, do you think there's ever a chance we could be friends? For the kids' sake, if nothing else. That question caught me off guard. Friends? After everything? I didn't even recognize the woman I'd been married to anymore. I don't think so, I said. Not right now. Maybe someday, but right now, I need space to move on. And you should focus on fixing yourself, not trying to patch things up with me. Her voice broke as she said, Okay. I understand. Thank you for listening. I hung up and sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. Hearing her voice, hearing her regret, it stirred something in me. Not love, not forgiveness, but maybe a sense of closure. For the first time, I realized I didn't feel anger anymore. Just sadness. That night, I wrote in a journal my therapist had suggested I start. I didn't write about Denise's call. Instead, I wrote about my future, what I wanted it to look like, who I wanted to become. It wasn't much, but it was a start. About 2 weeks after Denise's call, I got an unexpected visit. Rachel showed up at my apartment with a look on her face that told me something was wrong. Dad, she said, standing in the doorway, I need to talk to you. It's about Mom. I let her in, already bracing myself for whatever bombshell she was about to drop. We sat down, and she hesitated for a moment before speaking. She told me more about the affair, Rachel said, her voice low. It's worse than we thought. Apparently, Denise had finally come clean to Rachel during one of their conversations. The affair wasn't just a physical fling, it had been a full-blown emotional entanglement. She wasn't just seeing this couple, she was confiding in them, complaining about me, and even making plans to continue their relationship long-term. Rachel looked at me, her eyes filled with frustration and hurt. She said she thought she was in love with them, Dad. Can you believe that? I sat there, stunned. Of all the lies and betrayals, this hit differently. Love? Denise and I had built a life together, raised kids, shared decades of memories, and she threw it all away for some twisted fantasy with 2 strangers. She said she's embarrassed and regrets everything, Rachel continued. But honestly, Dad, I don't know how to feel. How could she do this to us? To you? I took a deep breath, trying to process it all. Rachel, I don't have an answer. She was selfish, plain and simple. I'm sorry you have to deal with this too. Rachel nodded, wiping at her eyes. She told me not to tell you, but I couldn't keep it to myself. You deserve to know. Thank you for telling me, I said. I'd rather know the truth, no matter how ugly it is. That night, I couldn't stop replaying Rachel's words in my head. Denise's betrayal wasn't just physical, it was emotional. She hadn't just stepped outside our marriage, she'd stepped outside our life. It hurt, but strangely, it also gave me more clarity. Denise wasn't the woman I thought she was. And knowing that made it a little easier to let go of the life I thought we had. From that day forward, I resolved to focus on myself and my kids. I couldn't control Denise's actions, but I could control how I rebuilt my life, and that's exactly what I planned to do. After Denise's call, I focused on building a life that didn't revolve around her or the past. It wasn't easy. 33 years of habits don't just disappear overnight, but I threw myself into creating a new routine. Mornings started with long walks at the park, something I'd never done before. There was something calming about the quiet, the sound of birds, and the fresh air. It cleared my head in a way I didn't think was possible. I also started volunteering at a local food bank once a week. It gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a while. Work became my anchor. I took on extra projects, stayed late when I needed to, and even started mentoring some of the younger guys in the office. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was making an impact. Rachel and Matt were my biggest supporters through all of this. We kept up our regular dinners, and they'd check in often. Rachel, in particular, worried about me being alone too much. Dad, you need to get out there, she said one night. Join a club, meet people. You're not just Dad anymore, you get to have your own life now. She wasn't wrong, but the idea of putting myself out there again terrified me. I was 57, divorced, and still picking up the pieces of my heart. Dating felt like something from another universe. But life has a funny way of surprising you. One day at the park, I struck up a conversation with a woman sitting on a nearby bench. Her name was Susan. She was a few years younger than me, recently divorced, and had this easygoing laugh that made me feel comfortable right away. We talked about everything: our jobs, our kids, the struggles of starting over at our age. It wasn't a romantic connection, not at first. But over the next few weeks, we kept running into each other during my walks. Eventually, we started meeting on purpose, grabbing coffee after our walks or just sitting and talking on the bench. Susan became a friend, someone I could talk to without judgment. One evening, after another long talk, she looked at me and said, "You know, Mark, you're a good man. Whoever let you go made a huge mistake." I laughed it off, but her words stuck with me. For the first time since the divorce, I started to believe that maybe I wasn't defined by what Denise had done. Maybe I was worth more than the heartbreak. Things with Susan stayed platonic, for now, but it felt like a glimpse of what life could look like if I allowed myself to move on. It gave me hope, and after everything I'd been through, hope was something I desperately needed. Just when I felt like I was finding my footing, life had other plans. About a month after meeting Susan, I got an unexpected call from Rachel. "Dad," she said, her voice tense, "Mom's in the hospital." I froze. "What happened?" "She collapsed at work," Rachel explained. "They think it's exhaustion, maybe dehydration, but they're running more tests." I thought you should know. Hearing that threw me off completely. As much as I was working to move on, Denise was still a part of my life, if not physically, then emotionally. I didn't love her anymore, but hearing she was in the hospital made me feel something. "Do you want me to come to the hospital?" I asked. Rachel hesitated. "It's up to you. Matt's here, and I think she'd want to see you, but I know it's complicated." I debated for a long moment before deciding to go. Not for Denise, but for my kids. I didn't want them dealing with this alone. When I arrived, Rachel and Matt were sitting in the waiting room. Matt stood up and gave me a firm hug. "She's stable," he said. "They're still doing tests, but it doesn't seem serious." Rachel looked relieved but worried. "I think this is all catching up to her," she said quietly. "The guilt, the stress, everything." Eventually, I went into Denise's room. She was hooked up to monitors, looking frail and tired. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. "Mark," she said weakly, "you didn't have to come." "I came for the kids," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She nodded, tears spilling over. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For everything." I didn't respond. What was there to say? Instead, I sat in silence for a few minutes before walking back out. Rachel asked how it went, and I just shrugged. She's alive, and she's talking. That's what matters. Over the next few days, I kept my distance but checked in with Rachel and Matt for updates. Denise was discharged with instructions to rest and a recommendation to continue therapy. Rachel later told me their mom was trying, eating better, attending sessions regularly, and even talking about starting a new job to take her mind off everything. Hearing that should have made me feel better, but it didn't. Instead, it felt like a reminder of all the chaos her actions had caused, how one person's choices could ripple through so many lives. I told myself to stay focused on my own life, my routines, my kids, my budding friendship with Susan, but the hospital visit lingered in my mind. It was a setback, a reminder of wounds that hadn't fully healed. But I made a promise to myself: no matter what Denise did or didn't do, her struggles weren't mine to fix anymore. This was her journey, not mine. My job was to keep moving forward, no matter how hard it felt. After the hospital incident, I threw myself back into my routine. It was the only way to keep my mind from wandering back to Denise and everything that had happened. My walks in the park, volunteering, and work gave me a sense of stability, but something was still missing. One morning, while sitting on the park bench where I usually met Susan, I realized I hadn't seen her in over a week. It felt strange how much I missed her presence. She had become this unexpected bright spot in my life, someone who made the weight I was carrying feel a little lighter. I decided to call her. "Mark," she answered, sounding pleasantly surprised. "To what do I owe the honor?" I laughed nervously. "I was wondering if you'd want to grab dinner sometime. You know, something beyond coffee and park benches." There was a pause, and I felt my stomach twist. Had I overstepped? But then she said, "I'd like that. How about Friday?" That simple exchange filled me with a mix of excitement and nerves I hadn't felt in decades. It had been so long since I'd been on a date, or anything resembling one, and the thought of putting myself out there was terrifying. Friday came faster than I expected. I picked a small Italian restaurant downtown, one I hadn't been to in years but remembered fondly. When Susan walked in, she looked beautiful, simple, confident, and smiling like she was genuinely happy to see me. Over dinner, we talked about everything: work, our kids, the challenges of starting over. Susan shared more about her own divorce, how her ex had been emotionally distant for years, and how she'd finally decided she deserved better. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," she said, "but it was also the best decision I've ever made." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so focused on the pain of losing Denise that I hadn't stopped to think about what I might gain by letting her go. By the time dessert came, I realized I was genuinely enjoying myself. Susan had this way of making me feel seen, like she wasn't just listening to me but actually understood me. It was a feeling I hadn't had in years. As we walked out of the restaurant, Susan turned to me and said, "You know, Mark, I wasn't sure if I was ready for this. But tonight, it felt right." I nodded, feeling the same. Yeah, it did. We didn't kiss or make any grand declarations. We just said goodnight and went our separate ways. But as I drove home, I couldn't stop smiling. For the first time since my marriage ended, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was ready to start something new. It wasn't a perfect step forward, but it was a step. And for now, that was enough. The dinner with Susan felt like a turning point, but life has a way of reminding you that healing isn't a straight line. Just as I was starting to feel good about moving forward, the past came knocking, literally. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was getting ready to head out when there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Denise standing there, holding a small box. She looked better than the last time I'd seen her, less frail, more composed, but there was still a sadness in her eyes. "Mark," she said softly, "I know I shouldn't just show up, but I need to give you this." She handed me the box. Inside were photos, little keepsakes from our marriage, ticket stubs, a few cards I'd written her over the years, even a dried rose from our 25th anniversary. "I was cleaning out the house," she said, "and I found these. I thought, maybe you'd want them." I stared at the box, unsure what to say. Part of me wanted to hand it back to her and tell her I didn't need reminders of what we'd lost. But another part of me, the part that still carried 33 years of memories, couldn't bring myself to do it. "Thank you," I said finally, setting the box on the counter. She lingered, as if waiting for me to invite her in. When I didn't, she shifted uncomfortably. "I'm glad you're doing well," she said. "Rachel told me you've been seeing someone." The comment caught me off guard. "I've been spending time with someone," I admitted, careful not to give her too much. Denise nodded, her eyes dropping to the floor. "I'm happy for you, Mark. You deserve to be happy." I wasn't sure if she meant it or if it was just something she thought she should say. Either way, I felt a pang of guilt, guilt for moving on, guilt for not feeling more sympathy for her. But I reminded myself that her pain wasn't mine to carry anymore. Before she left, she turned back and said, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For all of it. I hope you know that." I nodded but didn't respond. After she was gone, I sat down and opened the box again. Looking through the keepsakes was like stepping into a time machine. Letters where I'd poured out my love for her, photos from family vacations, little reminders of the life we'd built together. After Denise's unexpected visit, I made a conscious effort to focus on what was ahead, not behind. The box of memories stayed on my shelf, untouched. I wasn't ready to sort through it again, but I also couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Instead, I poured my energy into new routines, time with Rachel and Matt, and my growing connection with Susan. Susan and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Our coffee meetups turned into regular dinners, then movie nights, and eventually weekend outings. It wasn't flashy or overly romantic, it just felt easy, natural. We hadn't defined what we were yet, and I was okay with that. For the first time in a long while, I was learning to enjoy the moment. One evening, after a quiet dinner at her place, Susan brought up something I hadn't expected. "Mark," she said, sitting across from me on her couch, "I've been thinking about us." My stomach tightened. "Okay," I said cautiously. She smiled, sensing my nerves. "Don't worry, I'm not trying to rush anything. I feel like we're in a good place." And I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what. I know you've been through a lot, and I don't want you to feel pressured to be anything you're not ready to be." Her words hit me like a warm breeze. "Susan, I don't feel pressured. If anything, I feel lucky. I never thought I'd feel this way about someone again." Her smile widened, and she reached for my hand. We sat there like that for a while, no big declarations, no overthinking. Just two people who had been through their own storms, finding peace in each other's company. It felt like a quiet milestone, an acknowledgement that I was truly moving forward, even if the pace was slower than I wanted sometimes. Later that week, I told Rachel and Matt about Susan. "She makes me happy," I told them during one of our family dinners. "And I think she's someone you both should meet." Rachel's face lit up with a smile. "Dad, that's amazing. I'd love to meet her." Matt gave me one of his rare approving nods. "If she's good for you, that's all I need to know." Their support meant everything to me. It reminded me that I wasn't just rebuilding my life, I was rebuilding my family's life too. Susan met them the following weekend over brunch. She was her usual warm, confident self, and I could tell Rachel and Matt liked her immediately. Rachel and Susan bonded over their shared love of gardening, while Matt asked her questions about her work, genuinely interested. When we left the restaurant, Rachel pulled me aside. "Dad, she's wonderful," she said. "You look lighter with her. Happier." For the first time in a long while, I could say, I am. The brunch felt like another step forward. Not just for me, but for all of us. It was proof that even after the hardest chapters of your life, happiness isn't out of reach. You just have to be willing to take that first step, and then the next one after that. As life with Susan slowly blossomed, I started to notice something surprising. I wasn't just healing from the divorce, I was rediscovering parts of myself I'd forgotten. For so many years, my identity had been tied to my role as Denise's husband and the father of our kids. After the betrayal, it felt like I'd lost who I was. But now, for the first time, I felt like I was figuring out who Mark really was. One day, as I was clearing out some old boxes from storage, I stumbled across a guitar I hadn't touched in decades. Back in college, I used to play for hours, strumming away stress or working out lyrics that felt too personal to speak out loud. But after I got married, life happened. Work, kids, bills, and the guitar got pushed further into the corner, gathering dust. I pulled it out, wiped it down, and tuned it as best I could. My fingers fumbled at first, but muscle memory kicked in. Sitting there in my apartment, the sound of the chords filled the room, and for a moment I felt alive. It was like finding a piece of myself that I thought was long gone. Susan noticed the change almost immediately. "You've been smiling more," she said over dinner a few nights later. "What's going on?" I laughed. "I found my old guitar. It's nothing serious, just something I used to love. I figured, why not?" Her eyes lit up. "That's amazing. You should play for me sometime." I waved her off, embarrassed. "I'm rusty. It's just for fun." But she wouldn't let it go. The next weekend, during one of our quiet evenings at her place, she handed me a glass of wine and said, "Play something." I protested, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. So reluctantly, I picked up the guitar and played an old, simple tune I remembered from years ago. It wasn't perfect, my fingers slipped on a few notes, but Susan's smile never wavered. "That was beautiful," she said when I finished. It felt good. Not just the playing, but being seen and appreciated for something that was purely mine, not tied to the past or anyone else's expectations. But as I was starting to find myself again, Denise's shadow loomed larger than ever. Rachel called one evening, her voice heavy. "Dad, I think you should know. Mom's not doing well." "What do you mean?" I asked, already feeling the familiar tension creep in. "She's struggling," Rachel said. "The therapy's helping, but she's still blaming herself for everything. She keeps talking about how she wishes she could go back and undo it all. I don't know how to help her anymore." Hearing that left me conflicted. Part of me wanted to say, "It's not your job to fix her," but I knew how close Rachel and Denise had always been. "Just be there for her," I said finally. "That's all you can do. But don't let her guilt you into carrying her burdens. She needs to figure this out for herself." A few days later, Denise texted me. It was the first time she'd reached out since dropping off the box. Her message was short. "Mark, I know I've done irreparable damage, but I hope one day you can forgive me." I stared at the screen for a long time before typing out a response. "Denise, Forgiveness is a process. I'm working on letting go of the anger, but it'll take time. I hope you're focusing on getting better, for your sake and for the kids. She replied with a simple thank you, and that was it. That interaction felt strange. I didn't feel the same anger I once did, but I also didn't feel closure. It was like her apology was too little, too late, but at the same time, it gave me permission to stop carrying the weight of her betrayal. Susan noticed my quiet mood later that week. "What's on your mind?" she asked. I told her everything, about Denise, the text, the lingering feelings I couldn't quite place. Susan didn't judge or offer advice. She just listened, then said, "It's okay to feel complicated about it. You spent most of your life with her. Letting go doesn't happen all at once." Her words stuck with me. Maybe letting go wasn't about wiping Denise out of my life entirely. Maybe it was about breaking the chains she'd left on me, chains of anger, regret, and betrayal, so I could finally step into my future without looking over my shoulder. That night, I played the guitar again, a little louder this time. I wasn't playing for Denise, or Susan, or even the memories of my old life. I was playing for me. The weeks after Denise's text felt like a shift, not just for me, but for her as well. Rachel kept me updated in bits and pieces, and from what I could gather, Denise was still attending therapy and trying to rebuild her life. She had applied for a new job, joined a support group, and was making slow but steady progress. I felt a strange sense of relief hearing that. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was enough to know she was no longer dragging our kids down with her. Then one evening, Rachel called again, her voice hesitant. "Dad, Mom wants to meet with you. Just once. She says it's for closure." I was caught off guard. "Did she say why?" "She didn't go into detail," Rachel said. "Just that she has something she needs to say to you in person." I wasn't sure how to feel about it. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep the boundaries I'd worked so hard to set. But another part of me, the part that had spent 33 years of my life with her, felt like maybe hearing her out could help me move forward too. "Tell her I'll meet her," I said finally. "But just this once." A few days later, we met at a small cafe. It was a neutral, public place, and I made sure to keep the meeting brief. When I walked in, Denise was already sitting at a corner table, nervously stirring a cup of tea. She looked different, not just older, but smaller somehow, like life had worn her down. "Mark," she said softly when she saw me. "Thank you for coming." I nodded and sat down. "What is it you needed to say?" She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I wanted to say goodbye. Properly. I know I've apologized 100 times, and it probably means nothing to you at this point, but I truly am sorry. For everything." Her voice cracked as she spoke, and I could tell she was holding back tears. "I know I can't fix what I've done. I know I've lost you forever. But I needed to see you one last time and tell you how much I regret throwing away what we had. You didn't deserve any of it." I sat there, letting her words sink in. For so long, I'd carried this anger, this resentment toward her. But now, seeing her like this, I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt tired. "I appreciate you saying that," I said finally. "But you're right, what's done is done. We can't go back. All we can do is move forward separately." She nodded, tears spilling over. "I hope you find happiness, Mark. You deserve it more than anyone I know." For the first time in years, I felt like she meant it. And for the first time, I felt like I could let her go. We didn't hug or linger. We exchanged a few more polite words, and then I left the cafe. As I walked to my car, I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of closure that wrapped everything up neatly, but it was enough. That night, I told Susan about the meeting. "How do you feel?" she asked gently. "Lighter," I said. "It's like I can finally let it go." She smiled and took my hand. "I'm glad, Mark. You deserve to move forward." And for the first time, I truly believed her. It wasn't just about letting go of Denise, it was about letting go of the version of myself that had been defined by pain and betrayal. It was time to be someone new, someone free. I went to bed that night feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I wasn't looking back. I was looking ahead. With Denise behind me and the weight of the past finally starting to lift, my focus turned fully toward the future. Life felt different. Not perfect, not free of challenges, but lighter. I wasn't walking around with a knot in my chest anymore, and that alone felt like a victory. Susan and I continued growing closer, though still at a pace that felt natural. I appreciated that she never pushed me to rush into anything. We spent more time together, blending our routines in little ways. Walks in the park became grocery trips, dinners at her place turned into quiet weekends together. It wasn't flashy, but it was ours, and that made it special. One Saturday, we were sitting on my apartment balcony, sipping coffee, when Susan surprised me. "Mark," she said, setting her mug down, "I've been thinking. We've been spending so much time together, and it feels easy. Good. I think we could make this work long term." I looked at her, unsure what she was getting at. "What are you saying?" She smiled, a little shyly. "What if we took the next step? Maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. I want to share my life with you." The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because I was scared, but because I realized I felt the same. "I'd like that too," I said. Her face lit up, and she reached for my hand. It felt like another quiet milestone, proof that I was ready to build something new, something lasting. Rachel and Matt had noticed the change in me, too. At our next family dinner, Rachel brought it up. "Dad, you seem different." "Happier," she said. "I am," I admitted. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm living for me." Matt nodded approvingly. "Good. You deserve it." Over time, Susan became a part of our family. Rachel and Matt welcomed her with open arms, and it wasn't long before they started inviting her to family gatherings. Seeing her laugh with my kids, fitting into their lives so seamlessly, was something I never thought I'd have again. But life wasn't all smooth sailing. Denise's presence lingered in small ways, a mention of her from Rachel, an occasional text about something practical, like selling old furniture from the house. Each time, I felt a twinge of something, but it wasn't anger or sadness anymore. It was just acceptance. The real turning point came when Rachel announced she was pregnant. "Dad," she said over dinner, her voice shaky with excitement, "you're going to be a grandfather." The news hit me like a wave. I hugged her tightly, tears in my eyes, and congratulated her and her husband. It felt like a new chapter for all of us. Susan was just as thrilled. "You're going to be an amazing grandfather," she said, beaming. The months that followed were filled with preparations, baby showers, nursery plans, endless discussions about names. It gave me something to look forward to, something to ground me in the present. When the baby finally arrived, I held my granddaughter for the first time and felt something I hadn't felt in years, pure, unfiltered joy. In that moment, surrounded by family, with Susan by my side, I realized something important. My life wasn't over when Denise betrayed me. It wasn't over when my marriage ended or when I walked away from the house we'd built together. It was just beginning. And now, standing on the other side of all that heartbreak, I felt stronger, freer, and more grateful than I ever thought possible. I wasn't Mark, the betrayed husband, anymore. I was Mark, the man who had rebuilt his life, found love again, and discovered that even after the darkest storms, there's always light ahead.